Hello, I am pleased to be joined today by Brian Howell. He is the founder of Crestview.io. This is a platform that helps leaders identify, assess, and visualize risk in organizations. He has a long background in business and technology risk, over 25 years worth of experience in this area, ranging from time in public accounting all the way to working in businesses and everything. I am so pleased to have Brian Howell join us here today. Brian, good to have you.
Yeah, Jason, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Look forward to our conversation.
So, what we want to come in on here first is really we're talking with an accounting information systems audience with some students, but we also want to talk to the general public. And so, we've got a couple of topics on our plate right now. We've got really information systems and risk governance that I really want to cover with you right now. But your most recent experience, you've actually worked with Spirit AeroSystems. So let's start there. I want to hear about Boeing. This is your most recent experience is with Boeing. I want to understand, you recently left there. How long were you there? What kind of roles did you have and what types of things did you see in that organization?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I had an opportunity to work at Spirit, joined nearly 7 years ago into the internal audit department. And Jason, you were working at Spirit's internal audit department at the time. So we've obviously had a chance to work together and get to know each other through that way. And I joined that team as an internal consultant focused on IT risk and cybersecurity. And then after a time, I moved into a senior manager role, helping lead the function. And then finally, I had an opportunity to move into the chief audit executive role. The former chief audit executive prior to myself that I had worked with for almost all of that 7 years moved on into a different role in the organization. And as Spirit was wrapping up its time as an entity before the transaction closed into Boeing, I had the opportunity to finish out as the chief audit executive at Spirit. And then the last few months have just been helping with integration, making sure transitionally all the pieces of internal audit were transitioned correctly.
Brian, I want to hear a little more about that chief audit executive role. That's a big deal. Can you familiarize us with what that is and what that means in an organization? Because internal audit, as we've learned, does not report to the CEO. Tell me what it was like working with the board of directors.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, from a broad governance perspective, the board of directors obviously is driving governance in any organization, and that internal audit function generally should be providing assurance back to that board. While there are quarterly board meetings, there are other conversations from time to time. Specifically, from a CAE perspective, you're having an opportunity to connect with the chair of the audit committee. In most organizations, you would report to them, and then administratively, you would report into somewhere else in the organization. So at Spirit, that was done into the finance organization. So report up to the CFO from an administration perspective and functionally to the audit committee chair. And it not only provides accountability to the overall organization from an assurance perspective, but it also provides an accountability back to the internal audit function to make sure that there's a plan and a methodology and the output is seen appropriately across the organization.
So one of the cool things about being a chief audit executive is you get to work for some pretty cool people on the board of directors. You got to talk with Irene Esteves, who is Time Warner Cable's CFO, retired. And then that moved to Laura Wright, who worked with Southwest Airlines, and actually also on the UNT Regents board. They're a big deal. Tell us what it's like to work with people like that, of that caliber.
Yeah, well, first of all, both Irene and Laura have been super gracious, both from a mentoring perspective, coaching perspective, but they also understood their roles. and they understood the role of internal audit and advocated strongly for internal audit at the board level. And, broadly, I would say the entire board was always very, very supportive of any type of activity that internal audit was doing.
We got to interact a little bit. I remember being on the internal audit team. We got to interact with the CEO from time to time, and so we got to meet Tom Gentile, who is still on the Fab 50 here at Wichita State. He's on the kind of the board of business advisors for it. He was an executive in residence for a little while up here at Wichita State, so that's great. And then, of course, Pat Shanahan came aboard, and he was one that liked to be in the shop a lot. So you would see Pat from time to time, and he'd see him walk by, and you knew that was something that was kind of a big deal. They were talking about him being a candidate for CEO of Boeing at one point too. So really very personable fellow though as well. But that's just so cool to have people around like that that are really involved in the business and to get to know how a large organization operates that way.
The reality is, all the way up and down an organization, these are people just like you and I. We all have our challenges. We're all navigating the highs and lows of life. And you can see that in each one of those leaders that you just mentioned. Really always grateful for those conversations and those life check-ins about, hey, how are things going? Even post time of working in that organization, just as the conversation we're having here continues on our relationship. And so always really grateful about that.
Yeah, same here. Okay, we're going to shift over here now to crestview.io. This is your Substack, and you have entitled this thing Risk Governance. Now, we know about risk management, we know about internal audit, but this name is chosen on purpose, if I understand you correctly. Tell us about risk governance. How's that different from traditional risk management?
Yeah, so I started the risk governance Substack with the idea to be able to dive into topics that are prevalent within enterprise risk management, internal controls, internal audit, but are not prevalent in the daily jobs of business leaders. There are components that are, but it's not their prime focus. And so what I wanted to be able to do was take these topics along the way, dive into them, write about them, try to write about them outside of a technical lens, and be able to be a help and a guide for individuals who want some information. So, for instance, what's on the screen now, one of the last ones that we published was around building an effective risk acceptance process, what that might look like. And so we start to dive into what that looks like in that article.
Yeah, and I like that topic, risk acceptance. We very seldom think about that. And your sell is why should the CEO care? Like, what is it that you say to a CEO or to a CFO or to a member of the board of directors that gets their attention, and particularly the people involved in the day-to-day, right? The CEO, what makes us care about risk governance? Like, what's the pitch?
Well, the pitch is it's hard to manage something that's not governed. Without some sort of a governance structure, it can tend to lead to chaos in a big picture. And so to be able to proactively drive some of these conversations versus constantly fighting a fire, that's the goal of governing risk.
Very well said there. And so now I want to shift to organizations. And we know that the reason there's a need for Crestview is that businesses still have a hard time getting their head around this concept of business strategy, decision making, planning, risk planning. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's that struggle?
Well, I think it's twofold. One, whatever their business is, more than likely is not risk management. There are obviously businesses and sectors that are built around risk management. But if you think about the entrepreneurial drive that started that business, there was a clear opportunity that somebody was chasing. And all of the effort tends to go into building that opportunity. The challenge becomes at some point in time, that entrepreneurial effort becomes a full-fledged business. That seedling becomes a tree. And there is a different need of risk management as it gets larger. The irony is, especially if you're looking at technology or software, you have the same risk challenges as a larger, more funded software tool. So the question is, how are you going to navigate that along the way?
Yeah.
Got a future article on risk governance coming out that's going to talk about features or foundations. And it really dives into the conversation around what do you do and how do you approach this when you're trying to move so fast at getting a minimum viable product out the door, and yet there are some practical challenges that you're still working through. Okay, so on the second piece of that, in my experience, assuming the company has an enterprise risk management methodology, it really comes down to a lack of margin or of time, or perhaps a lack of accountability to the process. Without a governance process, risk management can easily become an afterthought or perhaps merely a compliance exercise. And, while many companies live in that space, I'd say that's a very dangerous red flag space to live in.
Okay. And then I'd like to hear specifically about accounting. I come from an accounting background. Tell me what role you think the accounting system plays in risk governance.
Well, the accounting system can play a very large role and does play a very large role in the context that many times the accounting systems where it's defined what the segregation of duties might look like in an organization, they should be able to flag certain transactions or anomalies that are happening in the system. And it should also not allow certain transactions or combination of transactions. But that doesn't work unless the risk management has worked up to that point, because the system's only as smart as it's developed and as it's maintained. So if you develop a tool, an accounting system in this case, that does all the things it's supposed to do as of a certain point in time, but the business changes. Perhaps you purchase an upstart and because you want that technology or you want those opportunities to fold into your business. So then the question becomes, what changed about your accounting system based on the transaction that you just had? So it's a living, breathing conversation. That's that's ultimately what risk management is.
Excellent. And that really folds very well into our topics that we cover during the semester, like relational databases. These are these ones that we can modify and update the relationships as we go. So essential for proper accounting system architecture. Let's finish off right there, actually, because we've been talking a lot about risk management and frameworks and things like that. Tell me, that has its place, but how much is it about that, and how much is it about people and their judgment? Tell me how you think about that.
Yeah. So having built Crestview.io, I obviously have a penchant for understanding and trying to organize this conversation, right? And that's that platform, as you described, as being able to help leaders identify, assess, and then visualize what risk is in front of them. Um, However, there's a lot of different ways to do this, right? And so, for instance, our approach can start at the business process level, where you're mapping out the business process and understanding the risks that are within it. But many times that conversation is most well received or maybe most earnestly received because of some sort of regulatory or controls framework that they're trying to work through, whether that's NIST or CIS controls or the COSO framework along the way. And so in the end, businesses are facing a lot of risk with limited resources, right? And so there's always going to be a place for judgment factor to identifying and managing that risk. And while we can apply methodology and tools, I mean, imagine what people are trying to accomplish in what's coming out day by day right now in the AI space. It's really just an incredible opportunity on the horizon. At the end of the day, it's a business led by people and an organization that needs leadership on these topics.
Indeed, and thank you for that insight. Brian, thanks again. Let's talk again on internal controls and cybersecurity.
Okay, thanks, Jason.